As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
The inner critical voice is kind of based in shame. And so dealing with shame, confronting shame, and exposing that to the light of day is a way to open people up to the shared humanity and the connection and community.
The intention is to bring us closer to what we want and how we want to show up, how we want to be, what matters to us. And what it actually does is slam that door, whereas the coach helps us move toward opening it.
That was Shawn Costello-Whooley and Holly Yates on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
I'm Yael Schoenbrunn, a clinical psychologist, faculty at Brown University, author of Work, Parent Thrive, and a biweekly newsletter on relationships.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of Act Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
I'm here with Emily to introduce today's episode with Shawn Costello-Whooley and Holly Yates, where we are talking about the inner critic. And this feels like a pretty important topic because it seems to be something that maybe all of us can relate to. So, Emily, what were your thoughts about the episode?
I think that was my favorite part, was how much you all got into the common human experience of having the inner critic. And as a therapist, I think we see our clients truly believing that they are the only people who are so hard on themselves. And one of the kindest things we can do for ourselves is remind us of when we're having that experience with our inner critic, how human it is and how we're not alone.
Yeah. I think one of the most painful aspects of suffering is when you feel like you're suffering alone, or sometimes feeling pain itself makes you feel alone. And I remember learning from Kelly McGonigal that when we get stressed out, it stimulates cortisol, that like bad stress hormone, but it also stimulates oxytocin, which is the tend and befriend hormone. It's like when you're stressed, your body tells you to reach out, like to seek other people, because that is what we need to soothe our nervous systems. And so what you're talking about kind of reminds me of that like when we can really recognize that we are not in this alone, that we are in this together, that all humans suffer, even if that suffering shows up in different ways, that can be a really powerful salve. And, I do a lot of speaking around the imposter experience, and I've had a lot of leaders ask me, what's the best thing we can do to support our staff when they're experiencing this form of self-doubt? And I'm like, well, tell them that you experience it too. I mean, don't lie if you don't experience it, but, because it is such a common experience, and people don't tend to admit when they're having these kinds of self-conscious thoughts, that can be a really helpful realization for people to have. You just don't know that other people are experiencing it too, unless you really hear it.
Right. So I think it's being brave to talk about it and be more open. And as I was listening, I was really reflecting on how I think it's a pretty common human experience that 2025 has been tough. And there's a lot going on in the world, in our country, that feels like upheaval and things being turned upside down. And I think that I'm hearing it in my therapy sessions. This is a common experience of distress around just the amount of change and uncertainty. And there's just so much going on globally and locally that we need to remember. I want us all to remember the importance of those personal connections in our day-to-day lives and how nurturing those can help us so much cope with that larger stress and distress. And part of that is having this vulnerability with each other. This is such a good example of how to find a portal to connection is to share, be brave to share, like, this is how I'm feeling about myself today. And it feels really crappy. And then you give the opportunity to hear someone say, oh, I have that thought all the time. And so I just hope that people listen to this and really take away something to do now to help their interpersonal relationships and then help them deal with the broader world at large.
Yeah, I love this, Emily, because what we talk about in the episode is when your own mind is mean to you, how can you kind of turn that voice from an inner critic into an inner coach? But what you're talking about is a much broader, and we talk about self-compassion and the role of common humanity, which is sort of you thinking about and knowing that you're not alone. But what you're talking about is really making that piece experiential and explicit. And when I think about our tendency when we're feeling pain or fear or whatever is like, a wounded animal like goes and crawls under a bush by itself until it heals. And I think humans tend to do that too. It's like the more we're struggling and suffering, the more we might tend to isolate when what we really need is the exact opposite. So it's like you're kind of saying that like when that inner critic shows up, it's telling you that you're suffering. So yes, learn how to be kinder to yourself, which we talk about in the episode, and reach out to others, share, connect. And then you've got sort of this like dual intervention, essentially. Right. I love that. So for all of you listeners who struggle with an inner critic, we hope this episode helps you develop your inner coach. Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I am extra excited about my guests today because they are not only incredible authors and mental health professionals, but they are my friends, my dear friends. I have Holly Yates and Shawn Whooley here with me today. Holly Yates has been in private practice in North Carolina since 2004. She is trained in functional analytic psychotherapy, or FAP, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. She is a certified FAP trainer through University of Washington and has been an international and domestic presenter of FAP and ACT. She also co-authored a chapter on FAP and couples counseling, now translated into Portuguese and Spanish. She co-authored the Inner Critic Workbook, Self-Compassion and Mindfulness Skills to Reduce Feelings of Shame, Build Self-Worth, and Improve Your Life and Relationships, which we will be talking about today. Holly is deeply dedicated to helping people connect with themselves and others in a compassionate, open-hearted, genuine way while honoring their values and enriching their quality of life. Shawn Whooley is an ACT peer-reviewed trainer and licensed psychologist in private practice outside of Baltimore, Maryland, where she also works as a staff psychologist on the PTSD clinical team at the VA Maryland Healthcare Center. She is the owner and founder of Still Point Journeys, a super cool coaching and training practice. I added that to the bio. She didn't write that in her bio. Super cool coaching and training practice that takes clients and trainees out of the office and into life by using extended hiking trips and other active adventures to experience the change processes of ACT in real time. And of course, Dr. Whooley is the other co-author of the Inner Critic Workbook. So let's dive in. Welcome, friends.
Thank you for having us. This is fabulous.
It's so fun. I'm so excited to have you here. You know, being a podcast co-host is so much fun because sometimes we get to like nerd out and fangirl with people we've never met before. And then sometimes we get to like connect with people that we know and love. And I just think that that's incredibly special. So I'm really happy that you guys are here. Congratulations on publishing your first book. I think,
Thank you.
you know, we probably all have an idea of what an inner critic is, but let's just make sure that we're all starting off on the same page. So what does it mean to have an inner critic?
It's that really harsh voice, the voice that harms us, the voice that hurts us, the voice that tells us not really great things about ourselves. So that's the critic, while we're moving hopefully toward what matters to us, but it's that voice that says you're not, you know, whatever fill in the dot is around that.
Tries to stop you from moving toward what matters to you.
I think we did a bunch of research around this, but it actually really tries to prevent you from feeling harm or failing. And it actually works in complete reverse, right? You know,
It means well most of the time.
Talk about that a little bit. So I'm curious, like two things. I mean, one is, do you guys think, or do we know through research whether this is universal? Because I think I've shared with you that when I give presentations and I say, you know, think about some thoughts that give you trouble, you know, that these self stories that maybe say mean things about you, and raise your hand if you're thinking, I have no idea what you're talking about, Jill. And like literally no one ever raises their hand. So what do we know? Is this universal? And if so, then there must be a reason that we have it. So like, what is its function? It feels like so much suffering. So why do we carry this with us?
Well, gosh, that's a lot of questions. So starting at the top, there is data out there that suggests that some people do not have an inner dialogue. I have yet to meet those people, and they certainly have never come into my office. So maybe there's something to be said for that and some further research. I think most people, just anecdotally, have an inner dialogue, and there are all sorts of reasons why it comes to be that we do have an inner dialogue.
and you know, the function of it is to spare us some pain, which it doesn't actually do, to help us meet a certain level of excellence, which it doesn't actually help us do. And I think it started, like if we're going to look at sort of the genesis of it, there's a lot of ways it started, right? It started with attachment histories. It started with social learning. It started with what we came into the world with. It started with whatever our interpersonal interactions were, you know, and we've kind of integrated that. And it's not about not holding yourself to a high standard. It's about how do we hold ourselves to that high standard. And what the research shows is that being unkind and cruel and harsh to yourself does not help you get to where you want to be any quicker. It actually gets you there slower.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, you know, it does seem that most of us have one, even if some lucky people don't. It does seem to have this function of, I'm just trying to protect you from failure or rejection or humiliation, but it doesn't actually work. And I totally agree. There's like all this learning history that can contribute to this, right? Of course, if you had super critical parents, you might internalize that voice and feel like you're not enough. Or even if you have super, super supportive parents, but they do absolutely everything for you, then that inner critic might say, I can't figure anything out on my own. But I even think about the role that evolution must play, that, you know, like early humans had each other, and those who hunted and gathered and traveled together had a survival advantage. And if they got kicked out, they were literally dead. So constantly questioning, like, do I add value? Do I measure up? Am I enough? Was adaptive back then, right? And like now we know, even in modern times, our relationships, like the presence of quality connections, is the number one predictor of our physical and mental health and well-being. So it makes sense that we're always trying to make sure that we're measuring up.
You know, we have these really funny brains on our human bodies, where in some ways we're very animal and in some ways we're very evolved with our prefrontal cortex. And I think sometimes the wires get crossed, kind of what you're saying, where we have these sort of abstract ideas, these abstract concepts that we're sort of taught to rule our lives. And that gets kind of mixed up in the soup with our fight or flight system. And where way back when, our fight or flight system kicked in when the saber-toothed tiger was running us down. But now, as evolved humans, our fight or flight systems are also kicking in when someone calls us a name, or when we call ourselves a name, or if we're worried that we're not going to make the team or get the job. And we get a little confused what is actually physical danger. And so when our body responds, that then fuels our very sort of human thoughts, and then the process repeats. So it feels so fraught.
Right. And I think this makes perfect sense, because then if that inner critic is sort of kicking the fight flight response in, then what you were saying, Holly, is like it doesn't actually help us in the way it intends to, because then it's making us fight or flee, which is not what's called for in most situations in modern times.
Our social networks, right, whether they are virtual or in person, give us a lot of messages, right? Be great, but don't be too great. Eat the cake and make sure, you don't go over a certain weight or under a certain weight. It's very confusing. So we're getting all of this information, and how do we discriminate that? And we don't often say, I'm just good enough just as I am, right? We're in situations where we say, I'm not good enough as I am, or I'm too much.
Yeah, I mean, when do you ever say I'm good enough just as I am? I mean, that's something that takes work. And I imagine that's what you hope will come out of people using the workbook. So let's talk about that. So obviously there's a downside. So what specifically are the downsides of having an inner critic? And what are the problems that you hope the book will fix for your readers?
So the downside is, as humans, we tend to avoid discomfort or outright sort of painful situations. And so left to our own devices without sort of thinking it through, we sort of take that path of least resistance. So if a situation is uncomfortable or painful, we want it to stop. We want it to stop immediately. So we sort of go back to that at least blandly pleasant kind of equilibrium, which is fine some of the times, except we like to do hard things, and hard things are uncomfortable. And sometimes we have to try a few times, like, recording a podcast. If at first you don't succeed, sure, I try again.
So this is a little inside joke, because this is the second time that Shawn and Holly and I have tried to record this, because my computer was not cooperating a couple of days ago. Try trying again. And my inner critic did have a lot to say about that, by the way.
I have no doubt, right? Because it's so just present in everything that we do. Holly was talking about mixed messages, right? Be conversational and be relaxed, but don't sound like an idiot, right? It's these competing forces all the time. And so if I wasn't paying attention to my inner critic, I might not have agreed to do this podcast for all those reasons. It's too uncomfortable. It's challenging. It's something new. And so I think we found that people tend to not engage in things that are really meaningful and important to them, because it's uncomfortable to do that. And that part of their mind takes over and says, oh my gosh, don't do it. It's too scary. It's too this. It's too that.
And we want to be clear, and this may come later in your questioning, Jill, but it's not about not holding yourself to a standard. It's how do we hold ourselves to that standard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear that all the time in session when I talk about self-compassion. Sometimes that's the misunderstanding, that I'm lowering my standards. I'm being too easy on myself. So talk a little bit more about that.
I'm letting myself off the hook.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
So, and it's not that. It's I'm going to identify what my value is, and then how do I get there? And when I am wobbly along the way, or even if I do something that just isn't in line with my value, how can I speak to myself that can encourage and reinforce me to go forward? Right? How do I say, Holly, that was not your best day. That was not your best work, as opposed to, you stupid head. What are you thinking? Right? I think of a baby, and I've used this metaphor before. A baby's learning to walk, and they're wobbly, right? And they fall. And most of us, and everyone I know, would not say, you stupid baby.
Gosh, I hope not.
What is wrong with you, you stupid baby, right? But that's what we say to ourselves. We would say, okay, you got this. You can do this. Get up. We got you. You do this. One foot in front of the other. Let's go. Right. So we're looking at oh, Holly, you're such a stupid baby. When that comes up, that's the thing that I want to be able to go, well, that's not helping me walk.
Yeah.
That is keeping me down, actually.
So we know that the inner critic, like being super mean to ourselves, we think it's helping us, but in reality, it's not. And what you're saying here is like, we want to talk to ourselves differently. So let's talk about doing that. Because in the workbook, like you don't really encourage us to change our critical thoughts to positive ones. So like, why not? And what should we do instead?
So we don't bother because it's sort of a fool's errand. Those thoughts are going to be there. And so what we've learned and what the data shows also is if you really get focused on trying to change thoughts or stop thoughts, that's really just another version of not getting yourself where you want to go, because that becomes the focus. Oh, nope, I still had that thought. I better try harder, right? And you're spending all your time getting lost in your thoughts instead of doing the things.
So it's almost like having good intentions, but giving the thoughts more power rather than less.
More power, right? You're spending so much more time with them.
So having the thought that you want to change and not being able to, many people can't change those thoughts in that way. Like, you're not a loser, you're a winner. Like that doesn't work, right? So it's being kind to that thought.
Here's my mind doing that thing again. Duly noted. What is it I wanted to do anyway? Oh, it's uncomfortable? Okay, well, come on, Shawn. As Holly says, like, we've got this, right? The metaphor that I use with my clients a lot is the talk that you're aiming at yourself, does that slam doors in your face? Or is the talk that you're pointing towards yourself, does it maybe just, even if it keeps it open, just a crack, just barely ajar, but it's open? Can you move through that door and move toward the thing that you want to do? It doesn't have to be wide open like this feels great and it's easy, but you also can't move through that closed door. And so much of that harsh language just shuts us down. We know how to wound ourselves so deeply that it's like a door gets slammed in our face. So can we just talk and leave the door open?
And how many of our clients, I know this is true for myself, we have this narrative that says I am much harder on myself than anybody else is hard on me. Like I am my worst enemy, right?
What is it? Is it Kristen Neff who says, if you ever talk to your friends the way you talk to yourself, you'd have no friends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we have actually an exercise in the book that is that, like what would you say to yourself that you would never say to someone that you cared about?
Yeah.
What would you do?
And then right. And then it becomes really marked. Like, wow, there is such a discrepancy. Just like you would never say, you stupid baby. We wouldn't say these things to anyone other than ourselves. And, one of the things, kind of going back to your opening the door, a couple things that I like to talk about with clients. One is if you can change the thought and that helps you move in the direction of your values, great, by all means do it. Absolutely. But notice your experience. Is it shutting a door? Is it making you get more caught up? Are you trying too hard to change the thought and it's not working and it's backfiring and you're frustrated? Then there's another way. But if it works, great. And the other is like, sometimes your inner critic is actually pointing you to your values. So for example, my inner critic says, Jill, you were kind of a shitty mom last night when you had your face buried in your phone and you weren't paying attention to your kids when they were trying to get your attention. That's a mean thought, but it is also telling me that I wasn't showing up as the mom I wanted to be. And I'm going to pay attention to that thought and try to do better tonight, right? Do it differently tonight. But if that thought is saying, you are such a bad mother, you should abandon your family because they're better off without you, that's not a thought I'm going to listen to because that's going to move me away from my values.
Well, because even saying, like even the first one, I would want to take out the word shitty, although, that's okay. But what you did was like when we discriminate the inner critic from the coach, right? So what you did was kind of coach yourself. You're like, this was not the way I want to show up. That seems very valid. That seems reasonable. but I'm the worst mother ever. Yeah, I'm the worst mother ever, and they'd be better off without me. Oh,
So if people are having those like pretty real negative, like super mean critical thoughts, how do you encourage them? Or maybe even what's an exercise in the book to help people transform that inner critic into more of a coach kind of voice?
So it's like a care progression. It's like 4 steps.
yeah. So, if we were going to talk ourselves through it, we talk our clients through it, it is to connect with that thing that is really painful and hurtful, right? A is to allow it to be. Like it is what it is. It's there. R is respond to it. And we talk about responding versus reacting in the book. Let's respond to the stimulus that is present, not to what our interpretation of that is. And then embrace whatever is happening, right? And we have like the definitions for embrace. It is really to hold lightly or to be with it or to actually make room for it. All of those beautiful metaphors that ACT talks about. And what you did, Jill, is, you kind of allowed that icky feeling to come up. I could have done maybe a better job, or I could have been more effective. I could have listened a little bit more, right? And then you responded to that rather than reacted to that. Reacting would have been, I'm just the worst parent. It's just an example. I'm so awful. I never do anything right. Like they'd be so much better off without me.
So reacting might be kind of going down a further rabbit hole of critical thinking, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And then embracing that, meaning that wasn't my best moment. And guess what? I'd like to have a different moment. That would be a transformation.
And I think it also speaks to what you were saying before about how it's not about letting yourself off the hook. It's not like, oh, you're fine. You're a great mom. Everything you do is amazing. But just kind of handling those moments in a different way, like in a more self-compassionate way.
Yes. Which there's so much about being hard on yourself, just like being really, really harmful to somebody else is not effective. And what we were saying before is, what if we were as kind to ourselves as we would be to somebody else? What if we encouraged ourselves the way we would encourage our clients or our friends or our children, people that we cared about? What if we made room for error or failure? Oh my.
Like to just be human and not be
Just be
perfect.
human.
Yeah. Well, let's take a minute, because I've used the word compassion a couple of times, and certainly we've covered compassion and self-compassion a bunch on the podcast. But, for new listeners or anyone who even needs a refresher, because you talk a lot in the book about self-compassion. So what is self-compassion and how can that help specifically with that inner critic?
So there are really 3 components, or at least as defined by Kristen Neff, of compassion, self-compassion. So self-kindness, shared humanity, and sort of mindful awareness. And you really sort of, if you're practicing all 3 of those things at the same time, then you're practicing self-compassion. So sort of awareness of what is happening in this moment and sort of leaning towards some kindness towards self and the notion that I am a person of the human race and that we all, aren't perfect and we make mistakes and that we're striving. And, we were talking about a few minutes ago, like we would never say something to someone else. And like we tend to not judge others nearly as harshly for their shortcomings or mistakes. And can we sort of turn that towards ourselves?
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of what you just said, Shawn, is that when we define compassion, right, as mindfulness, kindness, and shared humanity, that if I'm going to extend that to you, then I get to extend that to me too, right? Like I am a human person, right? So what you are worthy of, I am actually worthy of as well.
Do you have a way that you help people connect with common humanity? Because I feel like this is sometimes like almost overlooked or skipped over, like, okay, I'm suffering and now I'm going to be nice to myself. And I think during this time where, we're talking about being in an epidemic of loneliness and divisiveness and everything else, that feels particularly important to me right now, is this idea of like knowing you're not alone.
The inner critical voice is kind of based in shame. And shame is such a silent suffering. And it's such an isolating factor for people. And so sort of indirectly, maybe answering your question, sort of dealing with shame, confronting shame, and sort of exposing that to the light of day is a way to open people up to the shared humanity and the connection and community. Shame keeps us small. Shame keeps us kind of shuttered away from other people.
Yeah, I think that's so well put, that shame is so isolating and that often we suffer in silence. We don't share this with other people. You know, you guys know I do a lot of work and wrote a book about the imposter phenomenon. And that is something people suffer with in silence because that belief, like, well, if I tell you I feel this way, then I'm outing myself as the fraud I think I am. Whereas when we just start talking about it, people aren't like, oh my God, you fraud. They're like, oh my God, you too? No way, me too. And then you realize that almost everybody feels this way, just like you would realize that almost everybody has an inner critic if speaking up. And it's this work you're doing with yourself, by yourself, that's like, I know I'm not alone. I know that human beings struggle. And even if they're not struggling in the very same way as me, they do struggle. But I think there's also this other work we could be doing, which is if we were sharing more and more open, then we would experientially see that, oh, yes, indeed, other people also suffer and I am not alone.
You know, we've talked about sort of the cycle of the self-critic a little bit in the book, and I think you've just described very well, Jill. Like, I have this inner critic and I keep it to myself, but then I say, but I don't have community. I don't have connection. Well, and one of the reasons people find it so difficult, one way or the other, is because of their inner critic, right? I want to go do this, but I have all these messages in my head, so I end up staying small. And what Holly and I have found, and what you've just described, is when you just start talking about it with people, ha ha ha, there's my imposterism, or I made this mistake, or I did, and other people kind of, when you find your people who are willing to talk in this way with you about their very humanness, it sort of melts away. You sort of don't need the inner critic to try to, keep you safe in social situations, because you're keeping yourself safe in social situations by being human, right? So it's sort of like a downward spiral or sort of a progressively, healthy spiral of keeping stuff to myself or just kind of being open and genuine.
Because the shame keeps us from any kind of understanding of shared humanity. It totally separates it from us. I am the only one that is this awful. Like, you aren't. I am. I'm the only one that has done this horrible thing. I am the only one that is a fraud. I am the only one that has been in my phone and not talked to my kids all day. I am the only one. Mm-hmm. And then once I'm just kind of reiterating what you both have said, once I speak that, what I realize is that I am actually not the only one. And that's where the shared humanity comes in. But if we keep hiding in shame, we don't even get to that part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when we don't hide, it creates sort of a perspective taking shift, because just like as soon as you say, nobody would say, you stupid baby, and we all laugh because we're like, no, of course you wouldn't do that. And it's so easy to see that, of course, I'm going to offer compassion to a baby. Wait, why wouldn't I offer to myself? And so the same way that if we start admitting the ways in which we're suffering, if you, Holly, or you, Shawn, say to me, listen, Jill, every day I feel like I'm not smart enough, I'm not successful enough, I'm not pretty enough, like whatever it is, I'm going to go, what? I can't believe you feel that way about yourself. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you, because you're amazing. And that is so easy for me to think and believe and offer you. And so then I can go, oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I bet they feel the same way about me. Right. And so then, and it can help shift that voice a little bit. Yeah.
And that's part of one of the exercises, right? So would I be willing to hear what, Jill, you just said to me, right? And drop that behind my eyes and see myself that way. Like, would I be willing to do that? If I am willing to do that, what's the mechanism of that?
So if I had to sum up what we've been talking about, it's we can't wait for these inner critics to start being nice, to quiet down, to go away, because that's unlikely to ever happen. And that when we are living our lives and doing things that are challenging, that we care about, if the stakes feel high, the inner critic is going to have something to say about it because it's trying to protect us from screwing it all up. And so the key is being willing to do those things that matter, even if that voice is loud. And so you guys have referred to values a couple of times. So I want to talk about values and to try to relate to that voice differently, to try to become more of, take that critic and turn it into a little bit more of a coach.
I mean, I love that. And I think what the inner critic turns into is a bully. And we have been taught to leave bullies alone. And what we know is that bullies get louder and they don't get nicer and they don't treat us better. And when we stand up to a bully, then that changes a lot of behaviors. If it doesn't change the bully's behavior, it certainly changes ours.
Okay, so now let's talk about all right, how are we going to stand up to the bully? So can we go back to the exercise you were talking about? Would I be willing to see myself the way someone else sees me? This is a workbook, guys. So there are so many amazing tips and tools and exercises. And if you do the work, it is going to be life-changing. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend getting the workbook and doing that work to get all the good things. But let's just give a little teaser of what some of the things are there. So would you be willing to walk listeners through if they wanted to do this exercise of, okay, yeah, I'm willing to see myself the way other people see me. What do I do?
So if I write down something that I would say to myself that I would never say to anybody else, right? So let's kind of write that down.
So you're writing down what your inner critic is saying, basically.
What is your inner critic saying in relationship to something? In relationship to work, in relationship to writing a book, in relationship to teaching, in relationship to parenting, in relationship to
So I'll be
something.
the example here. So, Shawn might say, oh my God, you're going to say the dumb thing. You're going to say the dumb thing. I would write that down.
So then I would, if I were Shawn, right, or if I were working with Shawn, or if I'm Holly or Jill, whatever it would be, would you say that to anybody else? And generally the answer would be no.
Absolutely not. I can never imagine saying that to anyone else.
Okay, so we write down, I suck, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, and then what?
And then if you were talking to somebody else, what would you say to them? Look at that, right? You would not say that to somebody else. What would you say to them instead?
In this example, I would probably say something with kindness and shared humanity and keep the door open.
Right? Maybe you're doing the best you can right now. Maybe that's the best. Maybe that's what you got right now. Maybe that's what you're bringing right now. What if what you said instead of I suck is that I am hurting? So that's what I would say to somebody else. You're hurting, right? You're doing the best you can right now. A really crummy thing happened. You didn't stand for what matters to you. That's hard. That is so hard.
What you're doing is
right?
hard.
So what is the feeling that you have saying that rather than I suck, or I'm the worst, or I'm a shitty parent, or whatever it is, or I, say the wrong thing? There's a difference there, right?
Right. And so it sounds like part of what you're saying is, because we know this is not the power of positive thinking. In fact, we know there are a couple self-compassion studies that have looked at positive affirmations and that they actually tend to backfire and leave people, Do you remember the old Stuart Smalley from Saturday Night Live?
Yeah.
You're smart enough, you're good enough, and gosh darn it, people like you, right?
Yeah.
You say it in the mirror. So that doesn't work. And so this is maybe acknowledging that there could even be a kernel of truth.
Well, I remember when my oldest child was in 6th grade and he got an F on some test, and he was torturing himself, absolutely torturing himself. He really is that person that holds himself to a really high standard. And I don't know what happened, but when I picked him, he was, I can't believe I did this. I'm so stupid. What is wrong with me? What, so I, as his parent, was let's go home and kind of talk about this. What happened, right? What went wrong? What was going on? And what can we do differently tomorrow? And how do you feel now as opposed to how you felt waiting for me to come pick you up? I'm a little better, right? So can you say those things to yourself, right? I didn't study. I didn't do the homework. Okay, that happened. I didn't know the questions. I got an F. I feel really bad that I got the F, and I'm going to do better tomorrow.
Right.
Right. That's the process. Would you be willing to let that sink in, what mom just said to you, and look at yourself that way? So it's not, everybody gets an F. Like, we don't want to get an F. That's not a great idea. But it also wasn't, you are like horrible and you're grounded for 10 days.
Right. Yeah, like I didn't show up as my best self this time. But that doesn't make me a horrible human. Everybody makes mistakes, and I'm going to do better next time.
And even if something is completely out of your control, and I know control is sort of the thing that we kind of talk about, but if you did all the things that you had to do and it didn't work out the way you wanted it to, right? Like, what's wrong with me? I'm such a loser. Nothing ever happens for me, right? So if I'm saying that to myself, what I would say to somebody else is, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Or that was, I don't know why. Like, I don't know why that happened. And it sounds like you are hurting so much. And what can I do to sort of ease that burden a little bit? Would I be willing to drop that behind my eyes and see myself the way I would wish to see somebody else, or something that somebody else would get from me? That's one of the things.
Yeah. Yeah. So I read this book way back when to write a blurb for it. So it's been a little while. I don't remember if you have this exact exercise in there. But some of these inner critic exercises are like, imagine your 6-year-old self, because it's so much easier to be kind to your 6-year-old self. A person that it's easy for you to offer kindness to, and then try to internalize that voice for yourself, which is essentially what you're saying.
And right at the very beginning of the book, we have a list of all these things that you say to yourself, right? All these negative things. And that acts as diffusion in a way. When I look at that, when I say it to myself, it doesn't seem that bad. It seems like, well, I deserve it. And when I look at it, I go, whoa, that's rough. You're having a rough day. You're being pretty rough on yourself by saying, nothing ever goes your way, or whatever that is. Right. So one of the exercises is to actually give yourself some space from it. Like look at it. Like
physical space, look at it.
Yeah.
Actually, Holly, for anyone who's a newer listener, it's been a while since we've talked about like the specific core components of ACT. Remind our listeners, what is diffusion? You just used the word, this is a diffusion exercise.
Sure. So diffusion is essentially our relationship with whatever thoughts we're having, and to not sort of hold them so true with a capital T, and recognizing that we're having a barrage of thoughts and internal experiences all the time. And so when we use our mindfulness skills to sort of sit back or step back and sort of observe these behaviors on the inside of our heads that we're engaging in, that there's a little bit of separation between how truthy they must be and, recognizing them for what they are, which is words, which is sounds, right? Which are these sort of made up concepts. If we haven't really talked much about language at all today for this podcast, but that's also a big part of this, right? That, sort of how we use language and sort of take things as true isn't necessarily truth. And so diffusion is stepping back and watching what we're doing, and then sort of taking a more sort of directive approach with what we want to do with those behaviors, rather than just sort of accept it passively.
It gives us a different relationship to what we just said, right? So I can look at it and go, that's rough. Or I'm just the worst. I'm the worst person in the world, right? That's a thought. That's a thought that, I don't know, maybe I believe that thought. But if I tell you, Jill, I think I'm the worst person in the world, I can even think, surely there are people that are worse than me.
Right.
Surely I'm not the worst person that has ever set foot on the face of the earth, right? So even that way, like getting it out of here and into a shared space
Yeah.
Where you might look at me and go, and I might look at me and go, yeah, maybe not the worst.
And when Holly says get it out of here, she's motioning to her head for
yeah.
here.
We were talking about reacting versus responding a little while ago, and that's really a big function of diffusion as well, right? Sort of taking that pause and intentionally choosing what we'd like to do next, rather than just sort of have this automatic domino effect of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and it just sort of lather, rinse, repeat, where we're pausing the action and choosing what we want to do next. We're responding, right, rather than automatically reacting.
And also, the reacting is also an interpretation of what we have done. So let's use the example of the podcast not working the very first time. I'm just going to pretend, right? So responding could have been, you know what? It's not working. Let's do it again next week. And Shawn and I were like, no worries. We got you. We'll reschedule it. You're like, okay, I don't want that happened, but that's okay. Reacting would be, oh, they're mad at me. They must be mad at me. They said that they weren't, but I bet, oh my gosh, who am I to do a podcast? I'm being a little hyperbolic, but that's the reacting.
Yeah.
Responding is to what is going on in the moment, and reacting is to what my interpretations of what is happening.
Extrapolating out.
Yeah.
And boy, us humans are quite good at that.
Very good at that. Yeah. And so what you're talking about is really recognizing that, getting some distance from those thoughts, because in that space, that's where you can make a different choice. That's not just being dictated by those thoughts that you're taking very seriously, taking as truths with a capital T. But that's where your values come in, so that those choices can be based on values, not this bully, this inner critic bully who's telling you have no business doing X, Y, or Z. So let's talk about values, because we keep alluding to it.
Yeah.
Why doesn't one of you give us your definition of values? Because people mean lots of different things when they say values. Maybe even in the ACT community, people don't always think the same thing. And then maybe one of you can share a favorite values exercise that if our listeners wanted to get some more values clarity for themselves, it's something that they could do to do that.
I think in my work with my clients and myself and my friends, sort of how I like to define values are qualities of being in the world. How do I want to be in the world? And I don't need money and I don't need time. I can practice my values right here in this moment, this second. And so for me, qualities of action, it's a little silly Shawn secret. Most mornings I wake up and I quickly set an intention for the day, and I kind of pick among my favorite values of, all right, what do I want today to be about? So generously or compassionately or authentically, curiously. Curiosity is a big one for me. I just am always curious, and that's really easy to do. And so what sort of drives me to make my behavioral choices throughout the day? What do I want today to be about?
Mm-hmm. And what do I want to be about as I navigate through this day?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I love it.
Also for me, it's what really, really matters to me? Yeah. What is the thing that really matters? And how do I want to move in the direction of the thing that really matters? And like Shawn said, and what you just said, Jill, is what do I want my life to be about? What do I want to leave in the world? And our inner critic is so harsh because it keeps us away from what we want. That's one of the reasons. I mean, the intention, we talk about this also, the intention is to bring us closer to what we want, would actually, how we want to show up, how we want to be, what matters to us. And what it actually does is slam that door, to use Shawn's metaphor. It doesn't open the door, it slams it shut. Whereas the coach helps us move toward opening it.
So what's a favorite values exercise?
I have lots of them because I think so many of those things matter to me. Compassion, integrity, kindness, love, they all have to be behaviorally activated, right? Mm-hmm. So I would ask myself, what is my intention? What really matters to me today in this moment? We're sitting in our office or we're sitting in a workshop. What is the thing that really matters? Why are we here? What do we want out of this? And then what is the thing that stops us? And then what do we have to do in the face of the thing that stops us?
Oh, I love that. It's so present oriented. When you're really doing good ACT, you're doing a lot of the core processes right in the moment. And that is something I will admit is not a strength of mine. I mean, I'll do the exercises, not just talk about them, but it's very rarely about like this moment between us together. So that's a really good reminder, because the only moment we have is the present moment. So why not talk about how do you want to show up to this moment with us here together? I love that.
Also, what are all those things telling us too, right? If we go further, like what is the data that our emotions, our physical sensations, our thoughts, what is that data providing for us?
Right. I mean, even digging into the values that way and what gets in the way, you can also understand like when pain shows up, what are you doing? And what does that get you? What's the benefit? Then you see the function of the behavior, but also what's the cost? And so what might we be willing to do instead so that you can be living more consistently with values? So you really open up the opportunity to delve into a number of different acceptance and commitment therapy processes just by starting with that one sort of what do we want to be about in this moment. I love it. It's really cool.
And you know, something that your listeners can take away just from this podcast, sort of two related things are diffuse, sit back and observe, use those mindfulness skills. It doesn't even really matter like what you're observing, right? Just practice observing, including yourself. And then related to that is when you start getting into the regular practice of observing, you'll connect more with yourself. And you'll have a better language internally about what those values are, right? Yeah. If you're watching yourself in this moment and maybe you're sort of going off track and this isn't the way I was hoping this moment with this other person was going to go, it can kind of course correct you. Well, how do you want this moment to go? What do you want this moment to be about? And so if nothing else, getting into a regular practice of just noticing yourself and how you are in the moment and where you want the moment to go.
Yeah. Well, it's a really important and necessary first step. Like I always say, awareness or insight, whatever you want to call it, it's necessary but insufficient.
Yes.
Right? Just having awareness isn't going to get you very far, but you absolutely must have awareness if you're going to change.
That's right.
And we don't often spend a lot of time thinking about thinking. We just react, like you've been saying, we just react on autopilot with whatever those internal experiences, thoughts, and feelings are that show up. And that often means we're acting in values in consistent ways. And so that awareness of like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How is that driving me? And is it helping me to show up in line with my values or not? And so can I change my relationship to those thoughts and feelings so that I can show up as the me I want to be, how I want to be in this moment, what I want to stand for. Well, ladies, we're getting to the end of our time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you were really hoping you were going to get to be able to share with our listeners?
I think I would like to add just one little piece to that, right? So we are very willing to believe the worst about ourselves. And when we are talking to other people and they tell us maybe some of the things that they really care about us, love about us, would we be willing to let those in too? So, you know, we learn how to integrate that intrapersonally by and large by how we interact with other people too. So if other people say, I am so glad to see you, you know, many of us will say, they're just saying that.
Yeah.
Or, okay, well, you haven't called me in 5 months, but, you know, whatever that. Would I be willing to say, you know what? I'm going to let in that you really are glad to see me.
Yeah.
Then I am worthy of being seen.
Yes. Or like someone gives you a compliment and instead of, oh no, it's a thank you. You know, like really like let that sink in. Or, you know, there's a way to do that too. This reminds me of is like, even if there isn't a person present saying something kind to you, if you're being mean to yourself, you know, I remember doing this letter writing exercise ages ago with a woman who used to work for me and has been on the podcast, Dr. Janina Scarlett. And it was, writing, it's probably a Kristen Neff exercise or some version of that, but it's, first writing out all the mean things your inner critic says, then understanding what is it trying to protect you from or help you to do specifically. And then if you think of like a wise, compassionate guide, and it can be a real person or just kind of someone you imagine, if they knew you were suffering in this way, what might they say to you? And I actually thought about Janina because I knew just how incredibly highly she felt toward me, even though I didn't always feel like I deserved it, And I still have that letter in a drawer, and I pull it out sometimes when I'm struggling with my own inner critic to remind myself that like other people, have these really kind things to say about you. Can you try to internalize that? I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, like, can you see yourself the way other people tell you they see you? Shawn, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I think the piece about this book comes not just from our training and work as clinicians, but our personal sort of journeys with our own inner critics and our relationship and friendship with one another, I think has really gotten us to the point where we are so well-versed at speaking to ourselves and each other with kindness and compassion and shared humanity. And so that this book was also born from hard work and friendship in a very personal way for both me and Holly.
That really comes across. There's a lot of vulnerability in there. And I've attended trainings that you've both done that are in this area, and they're incredible because we're all humans and we all struggle with this stuff. Yeah. And it's not, I'm an expert, let me teach you. It's common humanity. I'm right there with you.
Common humanity.
Let's do this together. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I love it. If people would like to find you, learn more about you, come see you for therapy, buy your book, all the things, where can they find you?
Well, so the book is New Harbinger, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think Target. So it's the Inner Critic Workbook, Yates and Costello-Whooley. And to find me, I am DrShawnWhooley.com. All one word, ShawnWhooley. And I'm also at, all one word, stillpointjourneys.com. That's my sort of training and act out of the office.
Which is so cool.
Practice.
What about you, Hall?
So I am Holly Yates, psychotherapy.com, and I never know if my website works or not. So that might not be the best way. See, I am diffusing from that, right? And like hyates99 at Gmail, or on Psychology Today, you can find Holly Yates.
Fabulous. Well, this was such a treat. Thank you so much for joining me.
Jill, thank you. So much fun.
Thank you for inviting us. What a privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.